Welcome to part two. In this instance, we're going to give a case study. It's one that we published. Meg Harris is the lead author. Jonah Stinson and I are the co-authors. It appeared in Risk Analysis back in 2017. This is the South River in Virginia during autumn. It's up of the actual where the contamination comes in. It just shows you how nice a place it is. And if you also look at it, you can tell that some of the agriculture areas basically come to the bank of the river. And if you look carefully, the trees look like they're about to fall in, and they occasionally do. We're actually going to build an integrated risk, human and ecological risk assessment. The site here is a ERA-HHRA site. The picture is actually just below where the original mercury input was. You see a guy down there fly fishing. And this is in not the fancy area of Waynesboro. It's kind of one of the neighborhoods up next to the manufacturing plant. And what we're going to focus on is use of Bayesian networks, not just for eco, but to also integrate human and ecological components into an integrated assessment. So our objectives in this particular study was to integrate human health and eco into a single framework. Think about ecosystem services as the endpoints, and to look at human health and ecosystem services for this part of the South River in Virginia. An integrated ecological and human health risk assessment is kind of defined by a science-based approach combines the processes of risk estimation for humans, biota and natural resources into one piece and in a connected piece. So integration occurs through the risk assessment process, and people talk about the benefits, but you find very few case studies that actually demonstrate this integration. The benefit is that the integration is efficient, produces coherent, comparable results. The integration provides a complete picture of risk. Ecosystem services can be used to bridge human health and ecological risk. And an integrated ecological and human health risk assessment will reflect the needs of the risk managers if the goal is to do both in an integrated fashion, which is actually the case in the South River. Ecosystem services are goods and amenities provided by the ecosystem that contribute to human health, well-being, and economy and society. So that's how we're looking at services. You can see the references below. To bridge the fields of public health and environmental management, which is about time. The other thing is that these things are all highly quantifiable. There's uncertainty and so forth, but that's the same in anywhere this is strictly human health or ecological risk assessment. Pictures of people, the endpoints. We have children, these areas used for recreation and so forth, fly fishing, big economic input into this region. And the last picture is a lot of people go out here to the parks. They'll go up and down the river in boats. It's a really nice place. The South River is our study region. It's in Western Virginia. Waynesboro is the city you see a lot in our pictures. We break this study area into what we call risk regions that were, the area is segmented depending upon the endpoints, the inputs, and also areas in which we have sampling data. The South River eventually flows into the Shenandoah, which flows into Potomac and goes right through Washington, D.C. and out to Chesapeake Bay. Some of the water quality criteria here are set in part because of the attempt to manage the nutrients and so forth within the Chesapeake Bay. So yes, this is part of the Chesapeake Bay watershed. The history is mercury is released from it's not just a textile factory, it made fiber like rayon and nylon. There's been fish consumption advisories for mercury since the 70s. Actually, John Cairns and a group from VPI worked on here. It's managed under ERA-HHRA, and the management is towards the mercury levels. It's listed in impaired water through 303D process for PCBs and so on, And there's other stressors as well. PAHs, pesticides, phosphorus, suspended solids. Almost a classic semi-urban industrial river, even though it's in a fairly rural area of Virginia. The services we're going to look at are human health, recreation, the fishery, and the water quality. Again, another picture of the importance of the fishery is in this particular area. Our endpoints are going to be human health. So this is the entity, and these are the attributes if you're thinking about classic endpoint definitions. So this is the entity that we're looking at: human health, recreation, water quality, recreational fishery. And the criteria, the attributes are not to exceed Virginia health standards for recreation. We want to not compromise the health and well-being of the participants who are using this region. Water quality, there's water quality standards for, and recreational fishery. Can it support local and visiting anglers? And are the key species, the reasons that people use this area, are they going to be present? The criteria we have for ecosystems and services as endpoints is that it's definable, the service is measurable, and changes in the service are observed. There are established criteria, the service is present in the South River, and we can build causal pathways. If we can't do that, we basically can't deal with that particular endpoint as part of the risk assessment. And that does, in some instances, occur. Here we have the human use scenarios, and this is how we categorize them: all pathways of exposure. That includes the hunter, fisher, the fisher, farmer, recreational user. These are different categories. The sources of the mercury are going to be for all pathways: the fish, the game, garden crops, livestock. Hunting and fishing is a huge entity here. So again, there's a total number of sources. The fisher, they just go fishing. They don't hunt the wildlife, the birds. Then the farmer, just two sources. And the recreational user with no dietary exposure. And so there's not necessarily a source of mercury going into the diet, but there are other kinds of water quality aspects that we are dealing with. The methods: this is the source stressor habitat diagram, like I showed in part 1. There's a causal pathway. We build causal pathways through sources, through stressors, through habitats, to effects, to the impacts, which is the summation of our rankings for the various endpoints. And the sources and endpoints are both connected spatially and temporally by the shared habitats, the shared locations. Again, a Bayesian network. We talked about these in part 1. I've used them now in a variety of ecological contexts. And 2017 seems so long ago. We've published several other papers since then. Our Bayesian networks, as we talked about before, are probabilistic, quantitative, and transparent because of the software and the process that you go through when you build a Bayesian network. We have, again, our conceptual model. We write the conceptual model in the same format that we do the other materials. So we have sources, stressors, habitat, endpoints. In this case, the source for this particular pathway is human food sources. Another one's legacy land uses, where it's been contaminated going back decades, and some of the land uses. The stressors we're looking at are the mercury, additional chemicals, and bacteria, phosphorus, TSS, and so on. The habitats within the risk regions be like sediments, water, so forth, the floodplain, and the recreational areas. Their endpoints are focused on human health and the recreational uses. And from this, we build part of our Bayesian networks: the human health and well-being pathways, human health, public health, recreation, ecological. The species that we're looking at are smallmouth bass and white sucker. People do use them, the residents fish for them. Also, these are used by subsistence fisheries as well. The trout are stocked, actually. Very different kind of pathway, and that's what composes the recreational fishery. So we have our complete conceptual model feeding into the Bayesian network. So we have the dietary exposure, soil contact, river contact. And so each one of those nodes describe part of the pathway through the diagrams that we've shown you before, till we end up getting a risk estimation for the human aspect. Recreation. I showed you kind of the outline before, but here we have the fishing river, swimming river uses, all the various uses going into recreation, and then all the potential habitat for the suckers, for the fish, and so on, going in for floodplain recreation, again, falling into all recreation. So the floodplain uses covered by here are mostly birding and sightseeing and some hunting. The rivers uses up here are fishing, swimming, and boating. This is region recreation in pathway for region 2. And this is just a diagram of the probability distribution purported here. We do break our nodes into high, medium, low, and 0 rankings. These are based on criteria from the water quality guidance or human health guidance and so on, where basically the numbers that are not to exceed, that are beyond what's tolerable, are ranked high, and so on. And there's a lot more detail in the publication about this. So we're going to evaluate the models. We're going to do sensitivity analysis and look at the influence. Results. So water quality, and these are all for region 2. Water quality is at high risk in the region 2. This is the region just where the mercury is coming in as it's going through Waynesboro. Here's the recreation. Not at particularly high risk. It's the medium and low categories. The recreational fishery is the endpoint at the lower, that has the highest probability of having a low or 0 risk. And human health is actually at the lowest risk in this particular region 2. And each of the bar graphs are describing that. Here is the risk score. And the risk scores, we actually, for each one of the ranks, we have a score that we are appropriate to it. So you can actually add those up and look at them. One of the interesting things about this result is its water quality is the piece of is a part of the endpoints. They're actually at the higher overall average risk score. The fishery varies more from region to region, and that has a lot to do with where the fish are. Recreation is fairly even, and human health and recreation are about at equal risk. There are distributions to all this. Water quality at times can be at a fairly broad distribution. The lowest is actually, as far as the distribution is concerned, is the recreational fishery, with recreation in there. So this is cumulative risk per endpoint per region. Again, cumulative risk by region for each one of the different endpoints. And you'll actually see that regions 5 is at a lower average risk, cumulative risk, and the tails do overlap quite a bit. And so it's region 5 and region 2. If you just look at human health, you'll actually see that it's regions 3 and region 6 from all pathways have the higher risk score. It's still not very high, but the highest risk is regions 3 and 6 for human health. Human health is generally low. Risk regions are lowest in regions 2 and in 4. So it is a geographic distribution to it. And it's not like it goes lower risk from as you go farther away from the source. So it doesn't go low from 2, lower 3, lower 4, lower 5, lower 6. It actually varies depending upon the risk region, what the risk is. And it's not in a steady decline or a steady increase. So it's very dependent upon where you are in the river and the total number of inputs and where the inputs are within our study area. Sensitivity analysis, soil mercury is the biggest parameter, and you have crops. The trout in regions 3 and 6, mercury in all of the fish, mercury in the river, bacteria indicators are not particularly important. So in this case, and as you'd expect for toxicity due to mercury, the soil mercury is the more important variable for all these different parameters for the human health. Recreation varies quite a bit depending upon the endpoint. Between the regions, there's not a lot of variation, but between the endpoints, there is a great deal of variation. Not much spatial variability. Highest risk is to swimming and boating, not the fishing, not the things that people would typically consider. The sensitivity analysis for recreation, for the input parameters, the top ones for fishing are dissolved oxygen, fish tissue, river temperature. For swimming, river temperature, river discharge, bacterial indicators. For boating, the river temperature, river discharge, and bacterial indicators. So there's some overlap, but not complete overlap about what the most important variables are for calculating risk to these kinds of activities. For hunting, the mercury in the waterfowl, oh, that makes sense. And also access. Can people get there? Do they have permission to hunt on the lands? And for birding and sea sightseeing, again, habitat is really important. And then public access, once again. Both of these are, in some ways, if you think about it, I think those are exposure variables as far as the overall model would be concerned. Key findings. Yeah, the human health risk in the South River is low and not as spatially variable as the risk to the biotic and water quality endpoints. So yeah, human health is not going to be the major driver here. Mercury and other stressors increase the risk of exceeding water quality standards and limiting river use for the recreation. It's very possible to look at ecological resources, ecological risk assessments, and to connect the human health aspect to it. And you can do this through a Bayesian network. Risk can be assessed ecosystem services that are clearly defined and measurable. You don't have to wave your arms. You can put probability distributions to it. There are a lot of different ways of looking at it to make it as if it was a typical human health or just ecological risk assessment. So, do we meet the research objectives? Yeah, it could be integrated. Ecosystem services are part of a risk assessment endpoint, and risk to human health and ecosystem services could be assessed in this particular region. How about to confirm the hypotheses that people have had? So the integration was no more difficult than our other large-scale systems. The results were as compared to the other systems that we've worked with just ecological, were coherent and very comparable. Integration provides both the eco and the human aspect, along with the human well-being. Ecosystem services are a great bridge from just classical ecological risk and into human health. And an integrated risk assessment reflects the needs of risk managers, who usually come from different agencies, each with different missions, and are looking at different parts of the system. And within this model, a risk manager can go through and emphasize and look at and detail the sensitivity of the variables driving it to each one of their concerns. And then overall, with all the managers, then they can have the discussions about the risk management alternatives. The Bayesian network approach, the relative risk model, it worked as it has before and since. The results make sense. Integration provides a complete sense. We can bridge the fields and provide the information to the risk managers. Thanks very much. And if you have questions, my email is landis@wwu.edu. Please let me know. And I'll see you later. Hopefully I will see you around the conference.